Hello everyone, welcome to 135th session. Today our presenter is Dr. Matheesha Gunathilake and the topic is not self, in Pali, Anatta. So I'm not going to explain, Matheesha is going to explain that topic and the sense. So I think most of you know, but those who don't know, Matheesha is one of the co-founders of DIN. And also, he is our Supreme Din Dham Guru.
Mhm.
And without you, Matheesha, we wouldn't have come this far in our Din journey. Without talking much, over to you.
Thank you, Prasad, for those really sweet words. I don't see myself as such, but we have lots of teachers here in our DIN group. So I think that's been the heart and soul of the thrust of the group because we all learn from each other. Um,
Absolutely, but the truth is you are the main pillar. Yeah, there are other gurus, yeah, of course. I'm not going to undermine, but you are the main pillar of the.
Thank you. So I think today is an interesting topic for a lot of people, and it's a bit of a controversial topic, you might say. And controversial because it can be difficult to understand, but I hope I'll try and make it as easy as possible to understand it today. And it's also a very important topic. And the topic is, of course, anatta, or not self, or non-self, as it is called. And we know in stream entry or sotapatti, the delusion of self-view is broken down so that non-self or not self is understood. So I hope you'll appreciate the graphics as well as we go along. Um, so normally, let's look at what people believe normally when it comes to self. The normal general belief of every person on the street is that there is a self, that there is a me, that I am here, that there's a being, and that being drives everything. It drives the course through life. There is a driver behind everything. And this idea that there is a little person sitting, almost sitting in your brain, controlling everything, was there in the 18th century. And it was called the homunculus, a little person or man sitting inside your man or woman sitting inside your brain, controlling everything. Again, going back to this self belief. But modern neurology has sort of thrown that into doubt quite a lot, but we'll come to that later. So let's look at, I think we have to correctly identify what is a self, which is very important. Uh, if we don't correctly identify what is a self, we won't be able to understand why it is non self. So it's difficult to understand why something is not self unless we understand what is self. So there's this idea of a being that drives everything and it's permanently present. So some being has to be permanently present there. So it can't be impermanent, it can't be broken, it can't be fractured. It has to be permanently, continuously present there to say that there is a self there, because otherwise it wouldn't make sense. It'd be a broken up, fractured thing that it couldn't be a self. And this person or this being feels, this person or being thinks. So I believe there's a famous quote. Uh, I think, I think Heraclitus, philosopher, said, "I think, therefore I am." So he thought because he's thinking, he exists. So thinking is another feature of this being that exists. Feeling emotions is another feature of this being, and is incorporated into a body. So there is a body that holds this person, this being, this me. So this idea that there is a body connected to it as well. And another tricky one to understand is it's self-existent. So now if you looked at your phones or your laptop now, you will see that it's self-existent. It doesn't need anything else for it to survive. Whereas if you think of a image on a TV screen, like all the pixels, the image on a TV screen is not self-existent. It needs electricity, it needs a screen, it needs various things for an image to survive in that way. So that is not self-existent, whereas the laptop, the TV itself would be considered self-existent. So a being or the other has to survive on its own, almost like free will. It must be able to survive, but it can't be like an image on a TV screen. It has to be like a real person, self-existent. I hope that's clear. If it's not, just ask me. You can interrupt me at any point uh, in this discussion. I think it's helpful to just to discuss things as we go along when they're fresh in your mind and when you're more likely to appreciate the answer as well. So just feel free to do that. At any point, don't feel that the discussion is going on or anything. Just stop me and talk to me. I hope we can do that as we are all friends. So this idea that it should be self-existent is important, and it's fully in control. So I mean, you can understand. The Buddha asks, "Can you tell your body not to get sick? Can you tell it not to get old, become old?" And the idea that it is fully in control is not likely. So it becomes a problematic situation. But for if there was a self, it should be in control. It should be all in control. So is that clear to all of you? Because this bit is very important. Okay, so let's move on. So what now it turns out that there can be different kinds of self-view. Okay. Um, okay, I'm going to crack a joke. Um, usually you don't exclaim that you will crack a joke before you crack a joke, but nevertheless, I'm going to crack a joke. So, what did uh, the Zen master ask from the hot dog stand guy? What did the Zen master ask from the hot dog stand guy? Any answers? You can unmute yourself. Anybody knows? Samantha Yasastri?
No,
No.
I presume they go ask for a hot dog.
So yes, but something more? Any idea? No. So okay. So he said, "Can you make me one with everything?" Did you get the joke? A hot dog with everything, but also one with everything, suggesting that one with everything in the universe. So it's a very Mahayanic concept. But the idea that yourself can be one with the universe is a kind of a self view. Okay. So most of us Theravada people would think that, you know, our bodies, the self is limited to the body. But here's somebody saying, I'm one with the universe. And therefore, they believe in a small self and a big self. So this idea that there's a small self, the individual I, and the big I is the one with the universe, is the big self. So it's a kind of self which is limitless. So we have a limited sense of self. Sometimes there can be limitless sense of self as well. So some people believes that the self ends at death. Uh, so that's called Sasutwada. And some people believe that the self persists after death. Now, do we believe the self persists after death? Anyone? Do we believe the self persists after death? So no, we don't. We can't find a self even now. So there is no talk about it persisting after death, is there? So the basic idea is usually this is me, this is mine, and this is my soul. The form is me, form is mine, and form is my soul. So etam mama, eso hamasmi, and eso me atta. So to give the Pali. I just put the Pali there because it sounds so important in this case, just to get a sense of it. So the word mama, for example, is very similar to the Sinhalese word mama. So this is me, this is mine, this is myself. Okay. So this is the basic delusion that we all have about the self. We believe that I am here, that my body is mine, my mind is mine, and some of you might even believe that there is a soul that survives after death. That soul is also mine. So these are the three things which is considered in the basic delusion. This is also called Sakkaya Ditti, or self view. And so, but views can be very different as well. So, as I said, there can be limitless view or limited. So, the idea that the soul or the self ends at death, or general materialistic belief that the self ends at death, is called Uchedavada, that the self is cut off at that point. So, some people believe it might be limitless. Some people believe that it might be limited now, but it becomes limitless afterwards. So you might believe the body, the mind, or the cosmos, the whole entire cosmos is myself. So the Buddha actually made fun of this last idea that the entire cosmos is yourself. So there is that, but also there's an interesting little sutra where the Buddha comes across one man during his time who says that there is no self-agency, that there is no willpower. And the Buddha thinks this is such a strange view to have, but then goes on to prove that actually, people do have willpower. There is agency, even though there is no self. That's interesting, isn't it? So in Buddhism, we believe that we have the agency, the power to do things, even though we have no self. But self-agency still exists because we can do things, even if there is no self to be seen. And as you can imagine, this might be feeling a little bit confusing right now. And it was very confusing to those people during the Buddha's time because every person under the sun had a slightly different view of self. It exists, it doesn't exist, it exists later, it is limitless, it is limited. So things are mine, things are not mine. There are all kinds of different combinations of beliefs existed during the Buddha's time. And so when people came to ask him about these beliefs, he often responded in noble silence because he didn't want to confuse them even more. But he responded. So even if he was asked, "Do you have a self?" he would respond in silence. "Do you not have a self?" he would respond in silence. So some people notice that to the question, do you not have a self, he still responded in silence. Because we believe in not self. So why couldn't the Buddha just say, actually, there is no self? And the reason has been given. The reason is the Buddha said that if I told him that there is no self, he would believe that I had a self before, but now that self has come to an end. So it would fall into Uchedavada. So he didn't want to confuse people with the Uchedavada suddenly. And so he simply didn't respond to anybody. But if you see what he taught his monks, the close people in his circles, it is very clearly he taught non-self. There is no self. Okay, I hope that's clear. Any questions? Just ask me.
Sorry, what's the Pali word for agency?
That's a good question. Actually, I'm not sure. So I'll have to throw my hands up there. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Oh, yeah.
Matheesha, just a clarification, Gihanta here.
Yeah.
I found that point about agency quite interesting, actually, because I've kind of grappled with that, and sort of where I am now, and it'd be great to hear your thoughts about this, is that for me, and this might also connect with Mihir's question, is agency to do with action and a sense of exertion. And so maybe the self can exert, maybe the self can act. However, the outcome is not necessarily up to self. That's kind of where I got to so far, that you can exert and put forth action, but don't necessarily think that you can control the outcome. Yeah, that's all I'll say.
Yes, I think Gihanta, that's correct. So you can exert yourself, you can put in intentionally, you can do things. I mean, the whole idea of behind karma is that we can do things on our own free will and our own volition. So the sense of self-agency is very much a core part of Buddhist philosophy. There is no such thing as, I mean, virya, for example, the strenuous effort to put into the practice is all part of the Buddhist practice, Buddhist teachings. So self-agency is an important aspect that we have. It's just that we don't see it as emanating from a self as such, but nevertheless it does emanate, and we know we can work with it, function with it. And yes, sometimes we may not be in full control of the outcomes, but we can manipulate it to a degree, and get the best that we can under the circumstances. So yes, I think that's correct.
Thanks, Matheesha. I think Kumari's got a question. She's put her hand up.
Yeah.
Is someone?
Thanks, Matheesha and Gihanta. Yeah, I was just wondering. I heard that if I'm correct in saying this, that Buddha never said that there is a no self, but he said there is a non-self. Just wondering what the difference will be from a no self and a non-self.
Yeah, I think I'll pick that up now. I was going to talk about it in a later slide. So let me quickly jump to that slide.
Yeah, okay.
Behavior. So if you look at the bottom of the slide, not self and no self.
Yes.
So what this is that, so the Buddha didn't say that there was nobody here. He didn't say that there was nothing here. That's a misconception. What he said was that of the things that are here, and what those things that are here are the five aggregates. So Rupa, Vedana, Sanya, Sankara, and Vijnana, form, feeling, perception, intentions, and consciousness, are here. Those things are there, but they are not self. They cannot be considered a self. because they don't have the features of a self. They don't have the qualities of a self. And therefore, they are no self. Sorry, not self. They are not self, but you can't say that there is no self because because that gives the wrong impression that there is nothing here. But actually, the Rupa Vedana Sanya Sankara Vijnana is here. So that would be a wrong idea. Is that clear?
Sorry, I got a bit distracted, Matheesha. Could you say that again? What the difference is?
Yeah.
5 is not.
So,
yeah, sorry.
we are talking about something here, isn't it? We know that there's a body, there's a mind.
Yeah.
And we know the body and the mind are made up of 5 aggregates.
Yes.
So Rupa, Vedana, Sanya, Sankara, and Vijnana. So there is something there. So it would be wrong to say that there is nothing there.
Oh,
So
right. Yeah.
no self implies there is nothing there. But there is something there, but it is not self.
Oh, I see.
It can't be considered self.
Like me, mine, and myself.
That's right. It can't be considered those things because it doesn't have those qualities of a self.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Thank you. That makes sense. Yeah. Thank you, Matheesha.
Hi, Matheesha. So,
yeah,
if in that case, not self is we are talking about living beings. Is that correct, or maybe
that's right.
wrong?
That's right.
Okay.
So
we are talking about living beings.
Go ahead.
Can I ask a question from Matheesha?
Yes, okay, of course.
Isn't self paticca samuppada?
So,
dependent on its conditions.
So,
if something is there, something is there. Self is like that, isn't it? Or sapekshava.
So, yeah. So what is there is dependently originated.
Yes.
And that's why I said then it's not self-existent. There is no thing that is just there, but it all arises in a string of dependent origination.
Yes.
I'll come to it later. I'll discuss it in depth.
Right.
So yes, that's a good point.
So Matheesha, could we say that there is no self, but there is something there, and that something is the aggregation, the 5 aggregates, isn't it?
That's right. Absolutely.
And unfortunately, the kind of misunderstanding is that we equate the 5 aggregates to self, and that's the issue. There is something, and that something is the 5 aggregates, and as long as we don't associate the 5 aggregates and pull it and bunch it up together and call it self and just call it 5 aggregates, then we are fine. But generally what happens is we lump the 5 aggregates into something called self.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the reason for the misidentification is lack of samadhi. So the lack of concentration or insight into phenomena. We don't see the 5 aggregates the way it should be seen. We don't see it the way it is. We see it in an abnormal way. So we don't see it as impermanent, unsatisfactory, and not self. We see it as permanent, satisfactory, and self. And the reason why we can't see is because we haven't developed our minds deeply enough to see it as and when it arises, as and when the 5 aggregates arise. But having said that, it is said that that not self can be understood even logically. So there are times in the Buddha where the Buddha says those people who are not well instructed in the Dhamma don't understand not self. So it would seem that if you are well instructed in the Dhamma, there is a chance that you may understand not self even without having done the vipassana necessary to see it. So that's an important point. So there is a lot to be gained, hopefully, from today's presentation.
Yes, and I think this chart is very valuable because logically speaking, you can say the coming together of these 5 aggregates is what it is. It's like if you think about our body, it has the lungs and the heart and the mind and the legs and the arms, and coming together of all the organs forms the rupa part, and then coming together of the rupa and all the mental aspects result in this being, but don't confuse it with self, isn't it?
Absolutely, absolutely. That's right. It doesn't have the features of a self. It has the features of something else, not self. Okay. So just a bit of background. I mean, why is self and not self and all this so important in Buddhism? So we know the Buddha set off when he discovered old age, aging, and death. At Satra Parinamiti, he's the 4 views that he had as Prince Siddhartha, and then he wanted to find a way out. So, and to find a way out of that, you have to stop rebirth. There's a bit of an echo from someone. If you can turn your phones off. So they had to stop rebirth to stop old age, aging, and death. So if you look at what causes rebirth, it is karma, consciousness, craving, intention, and ignorance. So this is from a sutra called the Bhava Sutra, which causes becoming a Bhava. And if you look at the last one with the arrow in red, ignorance forms part of the reason why you become reborn. And so part of that ignorance is that there is a self is a part of the ignorance. So that's one way of looking at it. Another way of looking at it is in terms of sanyojana, so what binds us to samsara. And you can see that avidya is one of the uddambhagya sanyojana, that is things which bind us to higher realms. And things which bind us to higher realms, avidya being is one of them, and Sakkaya Ditti is a orambhagya sanyojana that binds us to the lower realms. So both these are intimately connected to self and self-view. So you can see how, as long as we're connected to samsara, our suffering won't end. And therefore, piercing through the veil of ignorance into not self is extremely important.
Question, Matheesha. There is a verse in the Dhammapada where it says, kamma. It talks about kamma, and it says, like a cart follows an ox, the kamma follows. So what does the kamma follow? If the kamma doesn't follow self, what does the kamma follow?
So that brings us to this idea of the what is there being paticcasamuppanna. So it is cause and effect. So when things arise and pass away one after the next, each cause gives rise to the next one, the effect. And we have a string of those causes and effects, each one giving rise to the next one. And what we have with karma is that at one point, it gives rise to karma vipaka, and that's an effect. So even though there is no self to be seen, but there are strings of causes and effect. So the karma works only on a given particular stream of consciousness. So it's a bit difficult to explain without an image. I'll come to an image later on. But what we have is a situation where a string of causes and effects is the only thing which we can find that we can call a self, which you can't call a self, but for the sake of ease, we're calling a self here. And that, if it gives rise to good or bad karma, ceases vipaka being manifested in that same line of causes and effects. It can't affect anybody else. So that's how it works in Buddhism. I hope that's okay.
Clarification there. So if we link it to, you said you can't link it to self, but we know the self is made up of the 5 aggregates. Rupa, Vedana, Sanya, Sankhara. What is the relationship between Sankhara and Kamma?
So that is the cause that gives rise to, let me quickly jump to the, okay, here we are. So we know that forms give in the eye, give rise to eye consciousness, which gives rise to eye contact, which gives rise to feeling, perceptions, and fabrications. So fabrications are sankhara here. And sankhara means things like intentions or chetana, which is the chetanam bhikkhave kammang vadami. Chetana is kamma. So you can see kamma arises from a string of causes and effects. So the rupa and the eye is a cause, the eye consciousness is an effect. Then eye consciousness becomes a cause for the next effect, which is eye contact. Then eye contact becomes the cause for feelings, perceptions, and fabrications. So you find that sankhara in that string of causes and effects is a chain there.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. So even though, yeah, in some ways there is a relationship between, part of what we normally associate as self has a very strong link to kamma. It's just that, we don't say it's self, but part of what, we normally associate with self. Okay, thank you very much.
So similarly linked to that question is the other question, if there is no self, who is reborn? What is reborn? So again, you can explain it the same way. So here you can see the causes: karma, consciousness, craving, intention, and ignorance. Those are the causes, and they give rise to becoming, and then subsequently birth. So it's these factors that are reborn. There is no self that is reborn, but cause and effect is reborn. It's just simple string of causes and effects which keep continuing. Okay.
Matheesha, but very interesting, isn't it, that string of consciousness that you said doesn't mix with other strings of consciousness. There is in other words, your consciousness and my consciousness doesn't mix. Your karma doesn't, impact my karma, and we all influence each other. But the karma that is being created using the chain of events that you just talked about, eye consciousness leading to perception and sankhara, all that that happens within yours doesn't really impact mine per se.
That's right.
So there is a boundary.
There is a boundary, and I think that makes it easier for the sense of self, the delusion of self, to arise.
Absolutely, yeah.
Because if I said something and that affected if I thought something and then you said something, if to my cause you had the effect, our boundaries would be much more fluid. That wouldn't make sense at all, would it? We wouldn't be able to save ourselves anymore. We're not independent anymore.
I mean, we do influence each other, but at the same time, the karma vipaka is kind of limited to. It's interesting. Yeah, thank you.
So you could say that the Buddha said, Kalyana Mittas are the strongest allies we have, strongest external factors we have in our practice. So you can see how that is a cause and effect mechanism as well. Sometimes one stream itself can't liberate itself. It has to receive help from another, especially the life stream of a Buddha. Has to have a cause and effect impact on your life stream for it to be sort of liberated.
Absolutely. And likewise, if your live stream is mixed up with the live stream of Papa Mitra, it goes the other way.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's a good point. So we have to be careful in who we interact with, and how we let ourselves interact. We must be careful. So, or rather mindful. Okay. So I think we've already mentioned the first two, that it can be understood logically. Delusion can be hard to overcome emotionally as we are attached to it. So I remember one of my friends went to a meditation center and she was meditating, doing Vipassana. And she was doing a Vipassana at the point of where it was about to penetrate into self-view. And she could sense, she said she could sense a resistance to practicing Vipassana because she didn't want to see that she didn't have a self. So emotionally, we are strongly bound up to the idea of a self, and we may not easily want to give up that delusion. So these delusions are sort of embedded in our way of seeing things and working and so on. So it can be hard. So that's why it takes a lot of practice sometimes to overcome these beliefs. Also, an interesting story. There is apparently when Bodhidharma took Buddhism to China, a Chinese emperor had heard about Buddhism and wanted to find out more. And I think he had said, "Why do you say that there is no self?" he had asked. And Bodhidharma said, "Sit in this," given him a kuti, a little hut to meditate in, and said, "Sit here and watch your mind and see if you can find a self." So I think the emperor must have been quite an intelligent person, because apparently he sat watching his own mind the entire night. And at the end of it, he had gotten up and left saying there is no self. So it's an interesting story how people might use a different technique altogether to understand not self. So it can happen. Now, understanding not self doesn't mean you're a stream entrant. There is more things to be achieved before you become a stream entrant, but this is like a major gateway into stream entry. You can't have stream entry without this. So it is one of the major insights that you must obtain before you become a stream entrant. So, however, normal people can also experience. Sometimes some people have seizures, which they feel that there is no self suddenly, and the sense of self that they've had all this time suddenly vanishes. So it's a disease condition, but sometimes they can get that sense of self out of them in completely unique way, and they carry with them that knowledge that actually there is no self. But it doesn't mean they're stream entrants. It just means that they have understood not self. And it happens at various levels. So I remember before I started meditating, I was interested in Buddhism, and I remember understanding into sort of the body, the atoms, and so on, understanding that actually this is just atoms. There can't be a self here, and feeling like a robot. I still remember it up to this day. I was going in a bus in Sri Lanka and feeling like I was a robot. And however, I did my meditations like many years later, and I understood it at a deeper level. So I think you can understand non-self at various deeper levels. So I'm hoping today's session will deepen your understanding about this.
Matheesha,
Yeah.
I've got a question. Now, sometimes when I meditate, say when I do Anapanasati, I mean, it becomes apparent. I mean, some of the thoughts that go through my mind become a bit clear, and then I mean, sometimes say thousands of thoughts like are there, that I could kind of observe. I mean, I'm not maybe deliberately observing, but I can see them, passing through my mind. And so when this sort of thing happens, it becomes quite obvious that there's no self, because like they seem to be random as well. One thought would come up, and then after a while it would lead to another one maybe. But I mean, so sometimes I feel when this sort of experience is sort of had, I feel isn't that anatta, like, because this vast stream of thoughts are going on in my mind, which I have no control over, like, I'm not doing it basically. So why isn't that enough of a realization? Or I mean, but obviously that's not sotapanna. But what more is required to really penetrate this anatta? Because it's sometimes quite obvious that that is it is not self. But why isn't that kind of level of experience enough to sort of penetrate it? That sort of question have, Matheesha?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So it is enough. I mean, you're clearly seeing that it is not self because your thinking is sort of disconnected. I mean, that man who said, "I think, therefore I am," you can see the delusion in that straight away. Because of the meditation that you're doing, and what you did might be very close to what the Chinese emperor did. So that's fine. That's not an issue. It's just that it must be embedded in a system of vipassana for it to go further. So, I mean, some people say when they're doing walking meditation, they feel that there is nobody doing the walking, or they're doing breathing meditation and there's nobody doing the breathing, and suddenly they can have insight into anatta. Especially if you have read about it, you've understood it already, develop right view around it, you're primed to develop a sense of non-self or not self. So that's absolutely fine. All you need to do is now use that, and it has to be part of vipassana development. So there are various insight knowledges that happen. So Namarupa Paricheda Jnana, Pacha Pariggaha Jnana, Sammasana Jnana, and so on, where you understand the Lakkhana and non-self. So it has to be a part of that, and then that takes you further. Because if you have one insight, one isolated insight, it doesn't take you further, but you have the right understanding still. So it's an unusual thing. So as I said before, even talking and logically thinking, you can come to an understanding of non-self. So it doesn't have to be through meditation even. But these various things can go deeper and deeper and deeper until you're an arhat, obviously, and then you'll understand non-self to the nth degree.
Actually, that's a very interesting thought that Ravisara mentioned, because now it's interesting because Ravisara, now when you, okay, so you're watching your mind and you see all these different thoughts that are coming up. And I guess because of your training, you sort of perceive that, okay, all these thoughts are, spontaneously occurring. So yes, therefore there is no self. But somebody else, including myself, sometimes when I see such thoughts, and very unrelated, sometimes it could be one emotion, then a completely different emotion. Suddenly you're thinking about a memory. Sometimes there's an anxiety, whatever. But then the person, even myself, because I have ignorance, I don't necessarily see that as, oh, an independent thought here, an independent thought there, and a independent, a thought here. Because of my ignorance, I continue to think something within me is creating these thoughts and link it all together and then call it me. And so then I get upset about what I'm thinking, or I not necessarily upset about what I kind of go with what I'm thinking as me, whilst you on the other hand think independently, okay, thought. So there is no self. But for me, because of my ignorance, I think, I had this thought that I need to go and do this, so I'll go and do that. So that's interesting. But there itself, you can see, you're seeing it without self. I'm seeing it with self because of the ignorance. I don't automatically, see the separation. I lump it and say, oh, Gihanta thought like this, so Gihanta acted like that. I'm not able to necessarily differentiate. Anyway, I just thought I should say that.
Thanks, Gihanta. Yeah, just to clarify one other thing now, this sort of thing happens when I'm doing Anapanasati. So I'm not doing like Chittanupassana. I'm not watching my mind. Like that's not the sole purpose of the meditation. Like it's Anapanasati that I'm doing. But while I try to maintain my attention on the breath, the mind can do both. It seems like, maybe because our minds are really fast. So it like as a sideshow, this vast stream of things go through the mind, at an incredibly fast pace, and I have no control over it. Like no control over in the sense like it just goes on its own, and I'm not directing it in any way, as far as I know, at least. So yeah, that's sort of thing. And so that, like Matheesha said, that I mean, at a logical level, maybe I can get an understanding. Okay, this is that feature. This is a feature of Anatta. But yeah, so my question is like, how much more does it take? But I think Matheesha has answered it already. Yeah, like when does the turning point come? What more do you have to see to sort of realize this, like, and penetrate this, and go beyond, that sort of thing. But I think Matheesha has already touched on it. Thank you, thank you, Matheesha.
I'll answer that a bit more as we go along. I'll show you a possible example of how you can go deeper with that.
Okay, thanks, Matheesha.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't want to take too much time, but just one other thought came to my mind. Ravisara, because you have mindfulness there, you see that as thoughts, individual thoughts. In my case, because I'm not mindful all the time, I don't necessarily see it as individual thoughts. I just take it as me. So that just shows you there the power of mindfulness. If I'm more mindful, then maybe I can identify those as independent, thoughts that are just arising. But because of my lack of mindfulness most of the time, I assume it's me. But if I had more mindfulness, then I can just maybe be alert and just take it as thought rather than self. Thanks.
Thanks.
That's right.
Yeah. Sorry, Matheesha. I just want to ask a question as well, because I too start sort of thinking of logically trying to analyze, like, what Ravisara was saying, non-self, you get, the thoughts coming in. I'm not in control of outside factors and my illnesses and all those things. I can logically partway analyze it, but then I sort of think the minute someone shouts at me or says something to me that I don't like, I instantly react and it comes back. You get either hurtful feeling, you get hurt, then I'm thinking, oh gosh, yes, so I'm going to go back to square one again now. And so obviously I haven't, really understood that there is no self. It's not a process, like a cause and effect, like in the dependent origination. I haven't, you learn the theory, but to put that into practice, then I realize the minute I react to situations, that's when I think, well, there is, obviously, I'm thinking about myself. So then I'm just wondering whether, is it that I need to actually understand impermanence of each of my feelings in order to, first of all, arising, passing of each of the 5 aggregates. I'm just wondering whether should I practice and understand that first, then things will click in.
I think,
yeah, sorry.
No, it seems you do have an understanding of not self, that it shouldn't be, but you're still reacting to the way what's going on around you.
Yeah.
And that's okay. As in, at stream entry level, you're not really expected to not have negative reactions, not have craving, not have anger. All that goes away at sort of non-returner anagami levels. So if you're starting out in terms of practice, all you need to do is understand. If you can just theoretically ask yourself, do I genuinely believe that there is no self, that everything here is not self? And if the answer is yes, I think then you're done.
Ah, right. Is that the view, isn't it? The Sakkaya Ditti, the view.
Exactly. That's right. It's a view. It's a Ditti. And if you don't have that Ditti anymore, then you're done. Because there is another deeper level, and that is, let me see. So this slide here shows the different levels of our delusion or ignorance. So at one level, it can be only, these are called vipallas or perversions of view. At one level, it's only Ditti. So Sakkaya Ditti is at the Ditti level. That means it's only a view that you have about yourself. And there are apparently 20 odd self views you can have. Different types of ideas about the self that different people have. So that's a view. And if you can logically understand that there is no self to be seen, then you're done with it. But on the other hand, like Gihant said, you might still be thinking in terms of me and I. Even though you don't have a view that there is a self or not, you might still be thinking in terms of me. Oh, he hurt me. Oh, why do these things happen to me? You might think in terms of that and may perhaps catch yourself later thinking, oh no, obviously there is no self. Why am I thinking like this? So that's the avijja vitarka.
Thank you.
At this deepest level, you can have atta sanya, which is, so it's not anatta sanya anymore, it's atta sanya, where immediately the second you see something, you identify that as yourself. So you see your body, you identify that as yourself. You see a thought, you identify that as yourself. That's the hardest one to get rid of. And that requires a lot more deeper sort of practices. So don't worry if the last 2 levels are not there yet. All you need to worry is about the Ditti now. Sakkaya Ditti.
Thank you, Matheesha. Yeah, I've got it now. Thanks.
Matheesha, in a nutshell, would you say that if you're not mindful, self exists? If you're mindful, self does not exist?
I wouldn't say that, Gyanta. The reason is, sometimes even when we are not mindful, self doesn't exist. Because the idea of the self, a thought about self, only pops up every once in a while.
Right.
We may or may not be mindful of it.
The thinking behind there was, now if I'm mindful, like back to Ravisara's suggestion, if I'm mindful and I'm mindful, okay, anger comes, mindful, greed comes, mindful, lust comes, mindful that I'm now tired, or tiredness, or mindful that I'm neutral, so then I'm mindful. Self doesn't exist. It's exactly what it is, the phenomenon. But if I'm not mindful, I am feeling angry and I act on that. I am feeling tired and I need to sleep. I am feeling bored. what is wrong with me. So when I'm not mindful, there is a strong sense of self and everything that happens. When when I'm not mindful, when I'm mindful, then I'm able to say, okay, that's just a thought, let it go.
That's right. That's right. So your mindfulness has to be instructed by right view.
Right. So mindfulness itself does not lead to wisdom.
That's right.
Mindfulness needs something else, you're saying.
Absolutely, absolutely. So the secular mindfulness groups in the Western world won't believe in a self or won't believe in non-self. They believe
Okay.
in a self.
Right. So you need to
So
have right view. Okay.
you got to have right view.
Thank you.
That is informing that. And if when you have mindfulness, you have an immediate golden opportunity to get rid of the sense of self. So if you say anicca and get rid of the sense of self, because self, the idea that is self is just a thought, isn't it? It's a misguided thought. If you say anicca and get rid of that sense of self, it will fade away very quickly. If you allow it to exist, it persists. So if you think, oh, he hurt me, or he did something bad to me, catch yourself, look back again and think, that's interesting. Myself is coming into this now. I have brought myself into this. Can I get rid of myself? And you can say anicca and get rid of the self, and immediately the hurt will fade away.
Okay. And why is it that when you have a very heightened case of emotion, whatever it may be, the sense of self is stronger, and when there is no emotion and the mind is peaceful, the sense of self is less?
That's a good point, because I think ignorance is ultimately linked to lobha, dosa, moha. They are linked together. Moha is the sense of self, but lobha and dosa give rise to all the other defilements. So I think there's a very strong connection to all of them. So even though I showed this slide, actually ignorance, the sense of self, comes into all the other defilements here. You see, so it kind of is involved in all the other defilements leading to rebirth. So I think you're quite right. It's a sense of peacefulness. So the Ajahn Brahm says a lot, if you're feeling peaceful and in deep into jhanas and so on, you won't be feeling a sense of self. So he says that a lot. So that's quite true. Because we are so used to this sense of the thought of self being connected to our defilements.
Thank you.
Okay, so it distinguishes the Buddha's Dhamma from other religions. There is no other religion which talks about a sense, not self. And every other religion talks about a soul that merges. So Atman, in the Buddha's time, was Atman, which merged with Brahman, God. And even in Christianity, you will have the sense of soul. The soul is there. So in all other religions, there's soul and God, which kind of have a common link. In Buddhism, there was a recent trend to start talking about anartha. That anatta didn't mean not self, but rather that it meant meaningless. So I just thought I'd bring that in there. It is the wrong interpretation of anatta. It doesn't mean anartha or meaninglessness, but it means anatta, attalessness, no self. So we already discussed karma and anatta. And often repeated in the sutras is this idea that self-view leads to agitation and suffering. So the Buddha says there is not even one instance of a self-view that doesn't lead to agitation and suffering. So having no view about the self is much better because it leads to calm and peacefulness. Okay. Any questions? So I just wanted to point at the graphic here. The flower. He said that even if the flower is broken up into its petals, the petals still hold a fragrance of self. So at stream entry, the flower is broken into the 5 petals, the 5 aggregates. And even though all the way up to arhathood, the sense of self still can exist as Atta Sanya. So there was a simile given by a monk likening it to a flower whose petals still hold the fragrance of self.
Matheesha, could you just go back to that previous slide, please?
This one?
Yeah, that last point you mentioned, self-view leads to agitation and suffering, and the point I made earlier, when you have agitation and suffering, that leads to even stronger self-view. It goes both ways.
That's true. That's true. So there is an interrelationship between ignorance and defilements. So that is so true. Because a lot of these defilements can't arise without a self. Something must happen to you. You must want something. You must crave for something. So this idea of a self is very strongly linked to the defilement.
And maybe fundamentally that link between loba and dosa, right? Craving and what's the opposite of craving?
Aversion.
Aversion. That is ignorance. That is self-view, isn't it?
Absolutely, that's right. So it's interesting that self-view is gotten rid of right at the start of the process at stream entry. So it kind of almost allows, it's like unlocking the key to allow him to work with the other defilements in the higher stages.
Yes, and a friend of mine said if you want to reduce self-view, try with every moment of agitation or every moment of desire to try and reduce that, because the more desire and agitation and aversion you reduce, thought to thought, that will then reduce self-view. So that I find that interesting.
Absolutely. Okay. Everybody's understood this slide now? I'm not hoping to go into depth with the 5 aggregates. I hope you know what they are. Okay. So, who can look at this diagram and tell me what it is supposed to be? Anybody make a guess? No guesses?
Is it parts of a chariot put together?
Perfect. Well done. You receive a golden point.
Okay. Sakkaya, no, Anagami stage then.
Absolutely. So it is a parts diagram for a chariot. But the interesting thing here is when you take it all apart like that, where does the idea chariot come in from then? Do you even get the idea that it is a chariot when you see it like this? No, you just see the parts, isn't it? You just see the parts, and there is no idea, no thought of a chariot here. So it's only when all the parts come together that we call it a chariot. But this chariot thing is over and above the sum of its parts. So it's a superfluous, it's an additional, it's an extra thing. Suddenly you call it a chariot, and then the chariot has certain speeds, it has certain monetary value, it has certain prestige. It's all kinds of different things get laid on the simple parts, which is not there actually, which is all built up in our heads. So so this is the delusion that we are projecting onto everything around us. So equally projecting onto ourselves that there is a selfie, and therefore suddenly you have human rights, you have all these things, you have a value, you have place in society, you have a role as a whoever in society, in your family. So suddenly things have become much more complicated, and 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 they're all projections onto a set of basic reality which we can't see because we lack samadhi. So, like parts of a chariot, um, like parts of a chariot which have been disassembled, if you can disassemble your own mind and matter into its various parts, you can start seeing what they're all about.
Matheesha, I'm not so sure now. If are you saying though that if I had more samadhi and you approached me, I would see your rupa, vedana, sanya, sankara, vijnana separately? What I see is, if you're in front of me, I'll see the body, and for you it's good old Matheesha, right? But if I
Yes.
had samadhi, if I had more samadhi, would I see you in your 5 parts?
No, you would see yourself in your 5 parts, and
Okay.
therefore infer that upon myself as well. So it's an inferential knowledge.
Right.
But initially, you see that by looking at ourselves. They say the whole path is within this fathom-long body. So you first look at yourself,
I
and
see.
by understanding it first, you extrapolate it to other people. But to understand yourself at a deep level, you do need samadhi.
Okay.
So there's this idea of a gana sanyava, which means we are seeing everything as a solid, not so. It's something. It's compound. It's made up of various parts, but you're seeing it as a single solid object. Gana, it's also called.
Yeah, because somebody said at one time that if you have really developed your mental level of samadhi or um, your perception, that you see all the vibrating parts of objects, and you actually do see things a little bit more separate than the composite. Certainly I've not seen such things yet. Anyway, I don't know whether you have any thoughts or comments about that.
That's right. So there's a meditation called the body scan, Goenka's body scan, which famously shows all the vibrating parts of the body. So you end up losing the outline of your body, but only seeing vibrations, and therefore it kind of there's a dissolution of the body, and you sort of tend to see it in terms of rupa kalapa. So that's an interesting meditation that can be done. But yeah, I mean, even if when you see a body, we see the skin, really, isn't it? The superficial nature. We don't really see what's inside the lungs, the heart, the blood, the phlegm, the urine. You don't see all of that. But we see what is present, what is on top. So even those meditations, you can, if when you do the Asubha Bhavana, you do it in a way that you group these things into solids, liquids, air, and so on. And when you finally take out all the bits in your body and lay them out in front of you, you see that there is no self in any of these bits. So you come to see that actually the body is without a self, and that it's all impermanent, unsatisfactory, and non-self. So there are techniques, meditation techniques, which can be used in that way. Any other questions about this? So this chariot is not my simile, but I think Venerable Sariputta mentions this at one point about non-self. I just gave it a modern twist. Okay, so there are several meditations which can be done. I think we talked about most of these ones now. Now, I think Ravisara did a better job of talking about it than I did about Anapanasati Bhavana and how that can lead to understanding non-self. So I mentioned Asubha Bhavana. The Mansikara is also looking at the elements, the four elements: earth, wind, fire, and liquid nature. So dividing those out and looking at the body in that way. Yonasamansikara means thinking about this in a certain way. Sorry, excuse me. Okay, sorry about that. So Yonasamansikara is simply about contemplating non-self in various ways, sometimes logically as well. So if we had to think in terms of continuity, for example, to say that two things are the same, so if to say object A is equal to object B, they would have to have all the same characteristics, isn't it? All the features would have to be the same. And then, however, if you take a baby and an old man, the characteristics aren't the same. They are different. So how can you say object A is equal to object B? It's different. So there can't be a self which is changed that much. So you can say if it changes moment by moment, that the self cannot exist in that state of flux. So that's one way of looking at it. Another way is to look at in terms of replacement of atoms. So apparently all the atoms in our body gets replaced every few years. So even the nerves in our brain get replaced eventually. And so that there is nothing which is old, the old person in you anymore after a few years. So if you are getting constantly replaced totally, how can you say you are still the same person? It's a different set of spare parts. So you can see that even logically it doesn't make sense. And looking at it in terms of science, we can say that there are neural correlates. For example, they have found that there is a part of the brain called the medial prefrontal cortex, which lights up when self is thought about. And so what they have found out is that they argue, it's called neurophilosophy. They argue that if the self was to exist, this part of the brain should be lit up all the time. But actually, it only lights up as and when required. So it just goes to show you that even science is beginning to show that the self doesn't exist. And also people having various seizures levels, I told you, also show that they can have insight into non-self. So these are different ways, apart from Vipassana, that you can have insight into non-self, or you could argue some of this stuff is Vipassana as well, because it deals with not-self.
Matheesha,
Yes.
Dhatu Manasikara Bhavana. What's that?
Dhatu Manasikara means, Dhatu means elements. Manasikara means thinking about. So contemplating the elements. So in
The
terms
solid,
of,
watery.
yeah, the liquid parts of the body, the solid parts of the body, the heat element, and the air element. So you can take those out and keep them separately and understand that each of those separate bits aren't self. So you could say, like, if you amputate your leg, does that mean you have amputated part of yourself? Is yourself now diminished because of that amputation?
So is
and
actually a bhavana about the elements in the body, or can it be? You know how
it's about the elements in the body. Yeah, it's about the elements in the body. These are all falling under Kaya Anupassana, which is about the body, in the Satipatthana. Okay. All right.
Hello, Matheesha, I would just life near-death experience also can be taken as an example in science, isn't it? That the self does not self is not there, because some people see them out of their body during coma, said to be, isn't it? Certain experiences, examples.
Yes, I suppose.
It's a near-death experience or something like that, especially people in coma, and when they're almost to die, and they see themselves in the bed being treated. And there were some instances, some examples people have related.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Especially you can see that the body is not the self. I think somebody asked this question, what is reborn? The Buddha answered that it is nothing but the five aggregates that is being reborn. So even if you think of a near-death experience, it's just the five aggregates or the four aggregates. Yeah. So you can see that those are impermanent, unsatisfactory, and not self. So you can apply it to that as well. But because, I mean, you can go the other way, I suppose, and think that it's a self that is floating above the body, and go into that kind of a wrong view, which you wouldn't if you hadn't been properly well versed in the Dhamma, you might go down that route.
Yes.
There's a danger in that as well. Okay, so if that's clear. So one of the things which constantly keeps repeating in the sutras is that whatever is anicca is dukkha or unsatisfactory, and whatever is anicca and dukkha is anatta. So this is from the Anatta Lakkana Sutra, and lots of other sutras as well, which always repeat this formula. So I think this is particularly relevant for Vipassana yogis. So because somebody could say anicca is not always dukkha. Can you think of an example?
Yeah, because we are out of lockdown, which is change, and everybody is exuberant and ecstatic about it.
Absolutely. So there was a wrong view, a wrong vada, which went about saying anicca is not always dukkha. So this statement is problematic, so the Buddha is wrong or something. But anicca is always dukkha is only applicable in terms of sankhara dukkha, or because things are rising and passing away at such a great degree, it's always unsatisfactory. Even though it's a pleasant thing that is arising and passing, it's still unsatisfactory. So that's kind of a deep insight which you get with Vipassana. And so during the Buddha's time, they believed that your atta, the soul, was very pleasant and pleasurable. And so what is anicca and dukkha couldn't be the soul. So it had to be anatta. So anicca, dukkha, and anatta are the three lakkana, three characteristics of phenomena, which you will see not in a day-to-day sense, but in a vipassana sense with samadhi. So is that okay? If anyone were to say the I is the self, that wouldn't be tenable. the rising and falling away of the I are discerned. And when it is arising and falling away are discerned, it would follow that myself arises and falls away. That's why it wouldn't be tenable if anyone were to say the I is the self. So here it's not the I, but the vision they're talking about. The vision arises and falls away. And then you can't say myself is arising and falling away because that doesn't make sense. So that's why the I is not the self. So somebody said that, if 5 aggregates are the self, maybe there's something outside the 5 aggregates that is self. What do you think about that? Sounds true?
Well, it's the projection of the 5 aggregates, isn't it, that we normally consider self? It's what you talked about earlier. It's like you see the persona, and then that we think that is somebody. We don't see it in its component parts. If we saw the component parts, then we wouldn't see it as that person. But we have such a superficial view of everything. But that's the way we perceive things. So I mean, it's not stupidness, because that's the way our 5 senses, when our eyes see somebody else, we don't see the eyes and the heart and the bits inside and intestines and whatnot. We see the person in some clothes, and we relate to that person in the superficial way we see it. But that's normal, isn't it?
Yeah, it's normal. I wonder if we must think of Asubha in a more of an give Asubha more of a role, because one of the perversions of view is that we see Asubha as Subha. Or rather, we see what is Asubha as Subha. So in our minds, we give a more positive interpretation or projection on the body than we perhaps should, if we had to go on this path. That is obviously not otherwise. So there is something in that. But so anyway, some people were trying to find a loophole and think that is there something outside of the 5 aggregates which can be considered self. But no, I mean, everything is captured under the 5 aggregates. Everything that can be considered self is captured under the 5 aggregates. So
oh, sorry, Matheesha, I was just wondering whether would it be the it's not just the anicca that's dukkha. Is it the attachment to the object, the clinging, craving? Because if all phenomena arises and passes, that's a fact. That's a truth. But I suppose if we attach to that and not let go and release, and that's where the dukkha comes, isn't it?
that's right. But you're describing 2 levels of dukkha. So there are 3 kinds of dukkha. I mean, this is really useful. One is dukkha, which is dukkha of suffering. So if you have a pain in your body, if you have a headache, that's the dukkha. That is, pain itself is suffering. And number 2 is viparinama dukkha. That is, change is suffering. So that's where the attachment comes in. And when you're attached to something, definitely you're going to suffer if you lose that person or thing, object. So that's viparinama dukkha, which is dukkha number 2. Dukkha number 3, which is this type of dukkha, is called sankhara dukkha. Sankhara dukkha means it's a momentary rising and passing away moment by moment. It's very rapid. And the main reason for that is the impermanent nature of it, anicca nature. And it arises and passes away moment by moment. And that causes unsatisfactoriness feeling that comes with it, because you realize that it's all an illusion. and it's fading away moment by moment. There's nothing to cling to. And that is a kind of unsatisfactoriness feeling that you get. So this is a different kind of dukkha.
I see. Yeah.
So yeah, all those dukkhas are valid. All come under the main, the truth of dukkha. But I think this sutra, that's why I said this sutra is talking about vipassana.
And isn't that the issue that we say you like somebody, and you like somebody because that person complimented you or something like that, and you think, well, that is, you expect, it's the constancy there, but the moment that person turns on you, then that leads to suffering. But we don't always, and it could be the other way. You might see somebody, and that person has a very negative view, and so you think you have aversion to that person, but maybe in a different situation, that person might change their view, and but we always tend to relate to, or that link, that clinging, that Kumari mentioned, is because we get attached to a certain constancy in relation to anything. It could be your work, it could be your children, it could be I don't know, your neighbor, what have you. But things are the way we want it to be doesn't always stay. It changes, and then that leads to suffering.
Yeah, I think that's very much so, I think, yeah. And then I think what you said earlier on, having sati at the top, if you're not in sati all the time, that's when you can get caught in this cycle and react, and isn't it?
Yeah, and if you have the wisdom to say things will change, then maybe you don't cling to things as much.
Yeah.
Because you'll get disappointed if you cling to a certain way that things ought to be, but it's never like that, is it?
No. Yeah. Thanks.
Okay. So the way to work on these things is, sometimes if you are interested in working on, say, your suffering and the sense of self, be really interested in that. And if you do that, you'll find that each time suffering arises, your mindfulness comes to the fore. I mean, you don't have to be mindful all day long, because often with our busy lives, it's next to impossible. But if we can switch on the mindfulness when it's required, then we can start working on something straight away. And you switch it off back again, and again when it arises at a different time of the day, again it's switches on. So it can work like that. And I think samavayam, or right effort, works in that way, that your effort kicks in when it's required. So we talked a bit about this slide already. So what I wanted to say was that it's about using mindfulness as a type of vipassana, or you call the mind movement vipassana, by Shiroma, who gave it that name. But nevertheless, what it does is, we are mindful of the 6 sense doors and watching the sensations as they arise. So sounds, sights, sensations, smells, tastes, thought, anything that comes, we are mindful, and we are noticing them one after the next. So if I were to do a little bit of that now, to be like, I can feel my hand on my knee, I can hear the wind rushing outside, I can see the light, I can feel this chair, I can feel my elbow against the chair, I can feel the hand on my knee, I can feel my foot against the floor, I can see the laptop, I can hear a plane in the air, and so on. So I'm noticing things one after the next and picking them up as we go along. And what you can do is, you start focusing in on the gaps in between each sound and sight and sensation and smell. And you start noticing that the mind is jumping from each sense door to the next sense door. And you start seeing the various components of this process. So you eventually become to be able to see the rupa and the eye arising, the eye consciousness arising, the eye contact arising, feelings, perceptions, fabrications arising. And you start seeing that what the Buddha said about this, how things arise, is actually true. And now there's an important thing to bear in mind here, which is this: you move away from the world when you do this. So you stop seeing objects, tree, ball, chair. Stop seeing it like that, but start moving into sights, sounds, sensations, smells. And even further broken down into eye consciousness, eye contact, feeling, perception. So you're moving away from the delusion of the normal world into a much more real, the more real thing that you're actually seeing through samadhi. You're actually picking up what's going on through yatha bhuta jnana, or knowledge of the insight of things as they really are. So you're sort of seeing it for reality, for what it really is. And when you start doing that, you start seeing that we've been living in an illusion. So you do it for sounds, smells, for all the six sense bases, and you start seeing that we've been living in an illusion. And also this idea that things exist or not exist are also understood to be false. So you don't believe that things exist anymore because they arise in a string of causes and effects. Nor do you believe that they don't exist. But it's more like a film reel that just arises and passes away moment by moment, each one giving rise to the next one as causes and effects. And it gives a sense of flimsiness of this film reel, this transparency, this what can you call it, this sort of insubstantiality, so that reality is seen in a third way, not as existing or not existing, but as neither existing nor not exist, but in terms of causes and effects. So this is mentioned in the Kaccayana Sutta, where the Buddha mentions how we start seeing reality in line with Vipassana is very different to how normal people see reality. So it's more like a film reel that it's stopgap motion moving from one thing to the next gradually. And when you speed it up, you can see it like it's happening in normal speed. But if you slow it down in Vipassana, Samadhi, you see things broken up and see it for what it really is. So, if I were to give you a simile, now just imagine there was a boy and he was in this room which has 4 walls and a roof and a floor. And all these 4 walls and the roof and the floor are actually TV screens. And so he speaks to people on TV and who speak back to him. And he believes that these people are real. But one day, he's grown up now, and you give him like a magnifying glass, and you ask him to take a look at the pixels. And you see that he starts seeing that actually there aren't real people here, they're just pixels. And this is a bit like how we understand not self. Because when we start seeing the 5 aggregates, we begin to see the pixels of reality. They start breaking down, deconstructing reality to see what it really is. So that's this kind of a simile that you understand that his reality, his view of the world suddenly changes.
Matheesha, can I also say that maybe, why we see the way we see it as a lot of things being constant is we don't see the pace of change. Now, if something was changing continually, so say, for instance,
any composite, right? Any composite, if the change is very slow, then we associate more constancy to it, and therefore there is more of an understanding that it's something permanent, and so there's a higher chance that we might cling to it. Whilst if something is, ever changing, then you probably understand that it changes, and therefore you will cling to it less. So unfortunately, the way our perception works, our bodies, the way sight and everything works, we don't see that, we don't see the change in, maybe in our families, our people we work with. We see everybody as constant, right? We see them as, constant. But if things were changing very quickly, or we were able to be so perceptible about the change, then maybe we wouldn't cling to things that much.
Yes, absolutely. To begin with, you see the change in yourself. And the reason we don't see the change is because we don't have samadhi. I keep going back to this, but the purpose for samadhi is panya, isn't it? Sila, samadhi, prajna. So the purpose of samadhi is prajna, and the reason we don't have prajna is because we don't have samadhi. And we don't see anicca for what it is, or dukkha, or anatta, because we're not seeing it through samadhi.
And can you define again what you mean by because we don't have samadhi?
Well, it's one-pointedness. So samadhi, the Buddha has mentioned, is chitta ekaggata. Chitta ekaggata means one-pointedness of mind, and so that culminating in focusing, when we focus exclusively on the breath, for example, we develop one-pointedness of mind, and it goes further and further until you develop into the jhanas. So
the more one-pointedness you have, then the change is perceptible. Whilst if your mind was distracted, you don't see the change.
Absolutely. If you're caught up in the five hindrances, you wouldn't be able to see the changes at that level.
Right.
But you might see gross impermanence, like a leaf falling or whatever. But that level is not enough to take your mind to nibbana. You need to see it at a momentary level, at a deep samadhi level, to take your mind to nibbana through seeing impermanence. So that's what the importance is here.
Thanks.
Okay. So I wanted to mention about this. So while we think, we are seeing the world, or we think when we look at our outside the edge of our hands, we think we see the world. Everything looks very solid. But actually, if you press your eyeball while your eyes are open, if you press your eyeball, you will see how the image curves. And when you press it like that, the image in front of you shakes and curves. So you can see that you are not actually seeing the world, but you're seeing the image of the world. So really, it's really an interesting point that everything is coming through our senses are not the world, but recreated, because when they're going through the senses, they get converted into electric impulses through your nerves. The image doesn't go to your brain. This is the electric nerves, the impulses that go to your brain, and they get reconverted back into images. So what you're seeing is a reconverted, constituted image, reconstituted image of reality, and it's not the real world outside, which might be different. We'll never know. And also because we might be seeing things in slightly different ways from each other as well. We don't know that for a fact. So the Buddha said all these, even the aggregates, they're very fleeting. They rise and pass away. They vanish, fade away quickly. They're like, I said, Rupa is like foam, Vedana is like bubble, Sanya is like a mirage, Sankara is like a banana tree trunk. This is not very substantial. Vijnana is like a magic trick. And The image that I've pasted here is a bit of a pun, actually. Can anybody see what's inside this bubble? I don't know, the image might be not very clear on your end. It's actually the world map, which is inside the bubble. And it just goes to show you that everything is insubstantial and sort of very quickly to fade away. Okay. Okay. Can I mention Hetupala, cause and effect? So this is, I mentioned about causes and effects. So it means that it's changeable. So here I mentioned about causes and effects, how the rupa, the form and the eye, visual image and the eye gives rise to eye consciousness, which gives rise to eye contact. So these are all chain of causes and effects. What does that mean though? If there is a chain of causes and effects which happen very quickly, it means it's changeable, isn't it? So no fixed self is present. So it's just changing things, causes and effects, and no fixed self is present. It's made up of different parts. It's not any one thing. It's a compound object, unlike a self, which is a solid object. And these parts only arise one at a time. So if you look at this rupa and eye consciousness, eye contact, all of these are not present at the same time. They only arise one at a time. So only one can exist at any given time. So each one arises, passes away, and passes the information to the next one. And that also arises and passes away and passes the information to the next one. And things get added on as they progress. And this process is automatic. Causes and effects happen automatically. You don't require a self. There is no need for a self in a cause and effect chain of sequences. So again, if any process is running on causes and effects, you don't need a self. So for example, you say you hear the doorbell. I will come to that in a later. Okay. So let's look at feelings. We kind of looked at rupa, form, before with Asubha Bhavana and all that. Let's look at feelings or Vedana. So now the Buddha has a nice sutra in the Mahanidana, Mahanidana Sutra. So he says, if somebody says, I am pleasure, or pleasure is me, but not adukkama sukha, or neither pleasure nor pain, or pain. If somebody says, I am one of as you know, there are three types of Vedana: pleasure, pain, and neither pleasure nor non-pain. And if somebody says, I am one of these things, you can always say, well, when the other two are arising, when one of the others are arising, then what happens to you? Because you won't get pleasure continuously all the time. Neither will you get adukkama sukha, nor will you get pain constantly. So you can't say that if you identify yourself with just one of those, you can't say that you're a self, because other things arise as well, not just that. So eventually it's impermanent. So he says feelings are impermanent, fabricated. So this is the idea that it's compound, made up of something, dependent on conditions. The condition for feelings is contact or passa, subject to passing away and cessation, so fading away. So, and he says, if somebody says he identifies with all three types of feelings, then you must say that there are states without feeling at all. So, Nirodha Samapatti or Sanya Vedayita Nirodha, there is no feeling at all. And then what would you do? Where is yourself in Sanya Vedayita Nirodha? and the person will be in trouble because he won't be able to say anything with that. So that's about feelings.
Matheesha, so whether it's the self or the feelings that we've talked about so far, I mean, these things exist. They're not going to disappear, and people exist. This being and beings around exist. It's just that we just need to understand that they're changelings, isn't it? They're changing beings. They're not going to go away. We need to learn how to live with ourselves and live with other people around us. Suddenly it's not as if the world's going to be a different place. It's just that all these beings are not constant entities, they're changelings.
Yes, that's correct. I think the impact is not there. The impact is to understand that you are unlocking the key to overcoming samsara and suffering, because you're chipping away at your Sakkaya Ditti, and overcoming avidya. So that's fantastic. So if you're doing that, then it helps in a different way and at a different point. But when it comes to working and living with others, then it's working on the defilements and the wholesome qualities in yourself. You need the Brahma Viharana, for example, to live with others, and a lot of mindfulness, a lot of metta, being skillful in how you manage your anger, your cravings, and all these kind of situations. I mean, lots of, I think, skillful behavior must go into working on relationships. And it's not easy at all. Just because you understood non-self doesn't mean it makes you a great person or a skillful
Why
one.
is it so difficult to be more skillful when it comes to the nearest and dearest? Why is that?
I wish I knew the answers, and I would bottle it and sell it.
Because I think I sometimes am quite skillful with
strangers,
with distant friends and workmates and neighbors, but very unskillful when it comes to the closest.
too much attachment.
I was going to say too much attachment because you love them too much, but
they press your buttons so easily.
They press the buttons easily, and because I think we are more open or susceptible to them as well, because they are our nearest and dearest, and therefore we are more open to them. Whereas it's a stranger, we are much more closed off, I think. But also we are more free to express our emotions, because there is that kind of social inhibition which comes with, say, a workplace. Whereas at home, you're kind of left to your own devices, and there's less. It's like going online, isn't it? Going online, people are less cautious, and they're more free to express themselves. Similarly, at home, with your loved ones, you see them every day, so you're not scared of them like your boss or something. You're more likely to sort of speak your mind and behave unmindfully. But I think the relationship is the last sort of vestige of practice. I mean, if you crack that one, I think you've done all you can with all the other areas as well. So it's the most difficult one, but it's also probably the most beneficial and rewarding one as well. No easy answers, but we have to keep on working on it.
Maybe we need to go to the what do you call, the forest, like Buddha did. That's why he left his family, I think.
Yes, once we are all retired, we can do that.
Yeah, that's true.
unless you're planning on looking after your grandkids. Okay. Intentions. So what is an intention? So it's a simple example from walking meditation. You have the intention to move your leg, and then the leg movement happens. So one is the cause, the other one is the effect. So it's a simple thing. Intention is nama, the leg movement is rupa. So intention one leads to the next one. So we always think of intention coming first, but can intention come second? So say you reach the end of your walking meditation path. There's intention to turn arises. So there the intention is the effect, and seeing you reach the end of the path is the cause. So cause and effect works in a different way. So intention comes second. Intention that you can see arises automatically if you're watching your intentions as you are doing your walking meditation. That is a certified sort of meditation kamatahana, where you are expected to watch your intentions while you're walking, doing your walking meditation. You can see that the intentions arise automatically, and then there is no self pushing an intention, and the intentions arise on their own. So you can think of it in another setting, a more relaxed setting, where the doorbell rings. There's intention to answer the doorbell arises, and then you go to answer the doorbell. So again, you can see it's just a string of causes and effects. There is no self required needed for that interaction. It can happen very easily on its own, and that's what happens. It's just that we don't see it, so we assume there is a self, that I am doing it. Whereas actually, if you're mindfully watching it, you can see that there is no self there doing it.
Matheesha, I've got a question there. Now, say for example, if you want to solve some problem, by exercising your critical thinking sort of faculty, now isn't an like in that sort of scenario, like rather than just looking at the complex problem at hand and wishing for the mind to find a solution, like if we mindfully sort of direct our minds to sort of find a solution to that problem, like so I feel the intention can be sort of controlled to some extent. It could be directed, or it could be because we have this problem, say for example it's a mathematical problem or a coding challenge or something like that. So I mean, there you have to I mean, the mind might find, like after pondering on it for a long time, it might find a solution might occur to you naturally, but at other times you might want to, if especially if the time is limited, you might want to sort of control your intention, somehow try to solve the problem by mindfully thinking, that sort of thing. So isn't there an aspect of control there as well? Like I feel it doesn't all. I mean, it doesn't always have to be automatic. Like sometimes we have to guide it in a certain way. Like
Yeah,
just
no,
wonder what
absolutely.
your thoughts are.
Yeah, that's right. If you think about how that more guided intention came into being, is because, say, in your example, there was a problem, right? So the problem is the cause. The more guided, more forceful intention is the effect. And so then the effect, the intention being the cause again, will give rise to solving the problem, which is the next effect. So again, what you're doing is a series of causes and effects. But it can feel it's being more guided by us, definitely. See, whenever there's mindfulness, it feels there's more guidance by us now. But something gives rise to mindfulness as well. So there's a prior cause, There's always a prior cause. I mean, the Buddha said he couldn't find the first cause, and there is no first cause. So he could always find a prior cause to things arising and passing away. Hope that makes sense.
Yeah, Matheesha. Okay, thank you. It's interesting.
Ravi sir, I would like to just come in there because this may not be Buddhism and Dhamma, but I have learned in management, for instance. Now you were talking about a problem. Now, if you keep thinking that it's a problem, it'll always remain a problem. But if you heart of heart really think that there is a solution, then the mind interestingly comes up with a solution. So that is used in management theory a little bit. So that if you believe there's a solution, then mind will present a solution. But if you keep thinking it's a problem, it'll always be a problem. And that's how, like some very successful entrepreneurs, when change happens, they see an opportunity. So like classic case with like say COVID, I mean, I know like it shut down lots of sectors, but certain entrepreneurs, they started, launching new products like antibacterial gels, and they got into PPE and minted money. So it's interesting how if you look at change and rather than seeing it as a problem, look at it as an opportunity. We see in the real world how some people become quite successful. So it's sort of, like what you believe is true then kind of manifests itself. Anyway, that might not be Dhamma, but it's interesting anyway.
Thanks, Gihant, for sharing that. Interesting.
Okay, so in meditation, so some monks believe that there is a type of consciousness called anidassana vijnana, or unreflective vijnana, or featureless vijnana, consciousness which is eternal. So they come to this idea from observing their own minds, and that the observer doesn't seem to change much, but it's the observed thing that changes. So, however, if you look at it in this way, now if you look at the observer who's doing the observing, that requires another observer, right? And if you require another observer, then that observer can be observed as well in turn, and so on. So until 100 billion times, there are many string of observers. So it becomes a meaningless thing, sort of an infinite expansion of observers. So you can see that these are just creations in your own mind to explain something that is going on, but it's not really real. But it is considered like a big deal or a big thing in some traditions. So I'm just letting you know about that. But it can easily be mistaken as a self, this observer. So that shouldn't be taken as a mistake in that situation. I hope that's clear. If not, just ask me.
Actually, Matheesha, yeah, I was just wondering, is it like sometimes, I've heard some Bhantes, venerables, saying that internal, external. I mean, we seem to think that we're inside and there's something outside, but that is a different concept, and we shouldn't sort of distinguish between that. And then that's why we're causing this them and us sort of like situation. We should align that together.
Right. Yes. It's interesting because there is this idea that everybody is interconnected, and therefore this bigger self idea, I think. And therefore we should all have metta towards everybody. I agree with that we should all have method towards everybody a bit, but whether we are all interconnected, I guess we are in a way, but not in a sort of a metaphysical way that is suggested. So anyway, different traditions have different understandings of this. So, I mean, for example, most of us consider our skin to be the extent of me, isn't it? Where I end, where somebody else begins. So why is that? Why have we given that arbitrary kind of point? Can't be extended to some other place, and so on. So maybe that the the border is arbitrary. Maybe it's just a creation in our own minds. So maybe if we are fully enlightened, these borders and boundaries doesn't exist. So it's an interesting thing to speculate on, but there is no clarity on the sutras about it either. So I can't really say.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Okay. So what is consciousness? As you can see, I'm going to the 5 aggregates slowly. What is consciousness? So consciousness is not a permanent fixture. We saw that eye consciousness, ear consciousness, nose consciousness, tongue consciousness, all these consciousness, 6 types of consciousness arise and pass away in very great rapidity. And they fade away very quickly, giving rise to their counterpart, passa, contact. So it's not something which exists like constantly. I mean, when you think of your own consciousness, do you think of it existing constantly? Do you think of it persisting? When you think of your mind, do you think of it persisting? So it's interesting to think about it. So I said it's more like a waterfall than a lake. So if it was a lake, it would be like a body that persists. But it's actually more like a waterfall, like this leaf, where you see a string of droplets. If you speed it up, you can see a stream of water. But if you slow it down, you just see droplets. Similarly, consciousness, if you speed it up, it might look like a more solid thing. But if you slow it down, it looks like one drop after the next. So it becomes more of a waterfall than a lake. It's just a way of putting it. And consciousness is a caused thing, isn't it? So the image and the eye causes the eye consciousness. So it's something which is external causing an internal object. So something external, the image and the eye, which is external, gives rise to something internal, which is eye consciousness. So it's not that there was eye consciousness always there watching the image and the eye. No, it wasn't. It was that just the image and the eye gave rise to eye consciousness. And that eye consciousness didn't exist all the time, or consciousness didn't exist all the time, until there was a stimuli at the sense basis. So again, to show that it's more like a waterfall than a lake. And it dies and is reborn moment by moment. So if you take a look at this flame, the candle, is there a single flame there? No, there are multiple flames there, all rising one after the next. So what is a flame? But it's just the wax particles which have got burnt in flames, heated up, and passes away, starts at the bottom and passes away at the top, and then replaced by even more burning wax particles. So like that, it's a constant stream of wax particles burning away. But for us, if you looking at it from far away, we see only one single flame, but actually it's not. It's just that in Vipassana, when we don't have Samadhi, we see it as a single flame, but we don't see the constituents in it. So the flame is a good example of that. Also, if you look at a light bulb, sorry, not a light bulb, a string of lights. Sometimes you see those ones which blink on and off, and from a distance, sometimes it looks like the light is traveling up the wire because the way it's blinking. So similarly, causes and effects can be like that, because the way the causes and effects are giving rise to something or the other, it looks like it's traveling, but actually there's no travel. It's just arising and passing away moment by moment. Okay. Okay, so the Buddha said, mere suffering exists, no sufferer is found. The deeds are, but no doer of the deeds is there. Nirvana is, but not the man that enters it. The path is, but no traveler on it is seen. So that's from the Visuddhimagga. So he has declared only stress in the cessation of stress. Only stress arises when something arises, and only stress passes away. So there is no idea that there is a self arising or passing away. So Ravi sir asked me about further progress. So the idea is that you're constantly watching impermanence of sounds, sights, sensations, smells, and you come to a point where you come to this understanding that any form that is past, future, present, internal, external, gross or subtle, common or sublime, far or mine, far or near, this is not me, not mine, not my soul, equally impermanent and unsatisfactory. So there is a vipassana jnana called sammasana jnana, which is this basically, and then goes on further development in vipassana. You become disenchanted with form. Nibbida is what happens at that point. You become dispassionate, viraga, and through dispassion is fully released. So that's nirodha, and that's from the Gadula Sutta. And I think there are further practices mentioned in the sutras which suggest that now, once you have already understood non-self, you work in that non-self idea of non-self deeper. So, having gone to the wilderness of a shade of a tree or to an empty building reflects thus: eye is not self, forms are not self, ear is not self, sounds are not self, nose is not self, aromas are not self, tongue is not self, flavors are not self, body is not self, tactile. Thus, he remains focused on not self with regards to the six inner and outer sense media. This is called the perception of not self. So, this is from the Girimananda Sutra. So, once you understand non self, you can apply it to, like, contemplate it in a deep way into the various internal and external sense spaces. Then it's also the case where the monk enters and remains in a certain peaceful awareness release. So that's like a jhana, awareness released, or Cheto Vinukti is a jhana. He attends to the cessation of self-identification. But as he's attending to this, sorry?
I don't know. I can't see your screen. I don't know if others.
Yeah, I can't. I lost the screen as well.
Can you
Can you see the screen?
No.
Yeah.
The last screen was Girimandana one.
Okay, hold on. I'm trying to fix it. Hold on.
Do you need for me to share it?
Wait, let me just see if I can do it.
Okay.
Can you see it?
Not yet.
No?
No.
I'm not sure what's going wrong, but this is just the last 2 slides.
You want for me to try?
Can you?
Yeah, let me see. Just a moment. That's that sound. Can you see my screen?
No,
I
we
can't see
can't.
it.
No, we can't.
Can't,
So let's just read it out.
Let me one more time start sharing. Now? No?
No, something came up, but it's a blank screen still.
Do you have to choose the screen?
It's like the Skype window we can see now.
Okay. So it is.
You have to turn it on.
Now?
All right.
Yeah.
Got it.
Let me, which we were.
One before the last.
Yeah.
Yeah, that next one. Okay. So this one, he's talking about attending into a jhana, and then he attends to something called cessation of self-identification. Now, I don't know what this is. Certainly, I haven't been taught by anybody what this is. But I was curious if it came across in the sutras. But so if there are any advanced practitioners, I was thinking this might be helpful for them. That's why I put it in. So it says if his mind, when he's attended to the cessation of self-identification, his mind doesn't leap up, grow confident, steadfast, or firm in the cessation of self-identification. For him, the cessation of self-identification is not to be expected. It's as if a man were to grasp a branch with his hands smeared with resin. His hand would stick to it, grip to it, and adhere to it in the same way, and so on. So, the interesting kind of meditation, which I haven't come across anywhere, is certainly not, as far as I know, practiced in any living tradition that I know of. So, but I thought it would be interesting to just to put it in there. Finally, can I have the last slide?
Sure.
Sir. Okay, so in conclusion, you just want to ask yourself, to what percentage do I believe that there is no self, or that things are not self? Can you think of a percentage for yourself? Do you even believe there's even little bit of a self left behind? Or are you quite clear that there is no self? Or things are not self?
Matheesha, your previous slide was talking about an equanimous situation where your identification of cessation of self or identification with self it is a reality that will fluctuate, and if you can meditate on it, your equanimous, whichever state your mind is in. And I presume that we are probably on a stage where 20% of the time we can be happy with this no self idea, for me anyway, and 80% of the time I'm more in the real world and thinking, reacting and behaving that there is a self. But the journey is what you're talking about, that we shouldn't fight it, that it should be something peaceful that comes, is it?
Yes, of course. It matures with time. And you have to sort of you have to contemplate it as well, see what in different ways the Buddha has taught this and why he has taught it and why it leads to peace and,
Yeah.
education.
Yeah, Matheesha, I think and not, I don't mean this in a tricksy way, but I think to ask to what percentages do I believe there is no self, I think it's in some ways it's an unfair question, because we live in a conventional world, and in the conventional world you got to live, act, and use mechanisms that work in a conventional world. So there's no at the workplace, when you're dealing with your patients, when you're dealing with family members, what have you, you got to work. What the vehicle you have, the tools you have, the toolkit you have, is yourself, or the 5 aggregates, what have you. Now we might think, yes, above all that there's no self, that's fine, and that's a good notion to have, but as long as we live in the conventional world and we're working in the conventional world, you are limited to the self, because that's how you get stuff done. Yeah, sorry, do I make any sense?
Yes, of course, and that's why I think I mentioned right at the start that the sense of self-agency is not lost. You still have those tools with you. It's just that overarching idea of a self, which
yeah, and also, I mean, Shunoma talks about this a lot, which is the Lokota versus Laukika, and I think it's fine for you to have it's better to have the Laukika view, but also understand that you're operating in a better to have a Lokotara view, but also understand that in most situations you're in a sort of a Laukika situation. So maybe you have a Lokotara perspective, but the tools are Laukika. So I think you just have to be you got to be practical, how you approach this. Yeah. Sorry if that's not very clear.
I mean, it all depends what you assume happens when not self is realized. Nothing is taken away. You are in full control of all your capacities and capabilities. You're pretty much like the person who you were before. So you can still function as much as you did before. Nothing changes. It's just a view of something changes. That's all. Because this is a change of view more than anything else. So it's like saying your view changed. You went from being a conservative to becoming Labour. But that doesn't mean you change how you eat, drink, go to the toilet or whatever.
Yeah, maybe there is less. I think, if at all, at the end of the day, I think the more you have less self, there is less suffering, because you're able to accept this whole notion of that things are changing, people around you are changing, the situation is changing, the context is changing, you are changing, and so you're more open to uncertainty. You're more open to flux. You're more flexible because you're not holding on so strongly to things, and so you're, I guess, a more peaceful person. So that might happen. So there'll be less suffering. Yeah, that's all I can probably say.
I mean, would that be a case of like accepting in a situation where, well, most of the time we're trying to accept being mindful with not the general mind, but with clear comprehension and putting Yonas and Manasikara and all that. And trying to live your lay life and accepting things, whatever comes to you, be prepared basically, and not having expectations, going day to day with your chores. I mean, it's easy said, but it's very difficult to be mindful all the time, 24/7, or even 5 or 2 hours or whatever. But you keep constantly reminding, maybe if one is able to develop that of whatever, because you're not in control. I mean, remind yourself that you're not in control of any most of the situation, but accept it, and then just give that space to yourself after accepting whatever it is, to then put the view, inject your, right view on top of it. I don't know. Maybe one way I was thinking of looking at it.
Yeah, no, that's helpful to accept things. Certainly, because if you have a very strong ego, for example, and mind you, we haven't touched on ego today. If you have a very strong ego, you might want things to be your way all the time.
Yeah.
And that leads to a lot of anger as well. So if that's the case, then you might be able to sort of reduce some of the grasping, the attachment to the self and the ego, and be a more calm and nicer person. So I think acceptance does play a part in it. Like with most defilements, when the defilements reduce, the sense of self reduces a bit as well.
I think in my case, like what Gihanta first mentioned was the sati. That's where my failure is, because I'm not in sati. Then you just react instantly. But when you're in sati,
yeah, I also want to say that so sati is important, but I'll take myself as an example. Now, I mean, certainly my sati has grown over time, but I don't think my view fundamentally has changed, and that probably has to happen at a very subtle level, through deep vipassana at some point. Now, that's not happened. And I know that because my sati has improved, because intellectually I understand this, in most situations, maybe compared to 10 years ago, I'm more mature. But when the emotions are very, very strong, I mean, just yesterday, I mean, I was absolutely livid. I can't believe it. Something was said by somebody, and I was a monster, an absolute monster. If any of you saw me in that state, how I behaved, what I said, you wouldn't think that this is Gihanta that you normally know, and that just showed me that if the right buttons are pressed, what a monster I can become. And so all the Dhamma, all the dins, and all this stuff at that moment, went outside the window. And that's not me all the time, but it happened. So it goes to show that, yes, generally, yes, I conduct myself in a way that is acceptable and, politically correct and, all that kind of stuff. And I don't, I don't get into quarrels and quabbles with people, but in certain situations, I can just completely fly off the handle. So that just shows that, ultimately, fundamentally, deep down, there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And my view hasn't changed. It's only my sort of intellectual understanding that has changed about all of this. So there's further work to be done.
I think it would be helpful to mention that there is different levels of panya. So the first level is Suttamaya Panya, where you, like today, you heard something and you understood something. And then there is Chintamaya Panya, where you think about it, internalize it, and you sort of do something about it in your own mind. And there's Chintamaya Panya. And finally, Bhavanamaya Panya, which is where you see through meditation itself, and that leads to the deepest transformations. So it's a gradual process, and you can't sort of necessarily go very quickly from one to the other either. So I think we are all in this path together, and it is a process, and gradually we'll get there in the end. But it's a slow process, and we got to sort of be patient with it.
Thank you, Matheesha. It's been really very comprehensive, very interesting. Thank you very much.
You're welcome, Gunathilake.
Very insightful.
So, any more questions or want to add to the discussion? So, already 10:30.
I think it's useful in terms of what Gihanta was saying to distinguish between the view of self. I mean, I actually like the question, to what percent do I believe that there's no self? Because that's really, in my understanding, that's a question about the view of self or the belief in self, which, if we practice successfully, is rooted at the first stage, at the stream tree. But the sense of self, which is what is functioning when we're in the world, that's not uprooted until a complete arhatship, until the complete eradication of mana, of that sense of self, of that identification, and the tendency of the mind to identify. And I thought it was such a great example. I mean, I think the fact that the mind can go along and behave in a Dhamma way, and yet when a button is pushed, then it really reveals not just that, I mean, certainly that there's more work to do, but it also reveals exactly what we've been talking about, that there actually is no Gihanta, that there are mind states that arise dependent upon different conditions. And when certain conditions are present, like what we call our button being pushed or being triggered, then mind states arise that generate really, really unwholesome actions. Anyway, just sadhu, sadhu, sadhu for today's really profound presentation. And thank you so much. I thought really brilliant.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you.
Any more?
Yeah, I've got one. Matheesha, you mentioned about insight knowledges. Now, do you know where in the sutras the insight knowledges are mentioned? Like basically, in other words, were insight knowledges taught by the Buddha, or was it like a later addition? Thanks.
So that's a good question. So if you look at the sutras, there is like a sequence. One is if you look at the Anatta Sutra, for example, they talk about the 5 aggregates. So immediately you're talking about not about your day-to-day level of seeing things. 5 aggregates means that you've developed samadhi and you're seeing it through insight, meditation, vipassana, satipatthana, and that you're seeing when you're seeing tilakkana. Later on, and you're seeing this sort of near, far, present, past, future, subtle, gross, and so on. Later on, it came to be called sammasana jnana, and something, and there was another one called nama rupa paricheda jnana, which means that the nama and rupa get separated out, and that happens if you're seeing the aggregates already. You reach that stage. And Paccaya Pariggaha Jnana means this Jnana number 2 is talking about seeing causes and effects. So if you see the I and I objects giving rise to I consciousness, giving rise to the Passa, Vedana, Sanya, Sankara, Vijnana, you can see the cause and effect mechanisms there as well in the Paticca. So like that, then the Buddha goes on in sutras. He talks about So in sutras, he simply says, see the five aggregates, see their tilakkana, see that it is for near, far, gross, subtle, all that kind of thing. And then he says, see that it is, see you become disillusioned. Nibbida, viraga, and nirodha. So nibbida is called nibbida jnana. Viraga, I think manchitu kamita jnana and so on. There are some jnanas that come into that. And also sankarupekka jnana is sort of relevant to that. Nibbida, viraga, and nirodha is finally magapala. So the only vipassana jnana which is directly mentioned is something called the Udyabhya jnana. Udyabhya jnana is mentioned in the sutras. It's supposed to be where stream entrance happen, or the stream entry takes place. And I think that's mentioned in several places because it's relevant, I think. But the later system, based on the Sapta Visuddhi, seem to have been extrapolated much later. But you can't say that there's anything wrong with those because they closely follow the sutra understanding as well. So, and it's helpful to understand sutras as well. It's a bit like Abhidhamma, but this is more related to the actual.
Okay, that's great, Matheesha. Thanks very much for that. Yeah, I've got another quick question, if you don't mind. Sorry, I've got too many questions, maybe. This last question, Matheesha, if you don't mind, and Prasad, if you don't mind. Matheesha, you said something about, you said something along the lines of that the Lord Buddha laughed off the idea that cosmos, like the self was in the cosmos or something. Do you remember where it is mentioned? Like, it's quite interesting. I mean, I'd like, if you remember where it is, I mean, it would be nice if you could let us know. Thanks.
All right. I can't remember. Let me just go through the slides. It might be there.
So you need to.
Oh, no, I'll use my slides. Don't worry. Sorry, I can't find it.
No worries, Matheesha. I just, out of curiosity, I wanted to find out. Thank you.
If I come across it again, I'll send it back to you.
Okay, that's great. That's fine. Thanks.
He didn't laugh at it. He just said it's a foolish view.
Foolish view. Okay.
The usual way of saying it.
Okay. Thanks.
Any more? It's the last chance. I'm joking. So anybody want to ask more questions from Matheesha? Share the waves. It seems to be not, there are no more. So it's a complex and deep subject. I think you all agree. As Matheesha, you said very correctly, need a lot of effort, and we need to keep working on it to get the benefit of getting understanding of it. It is a hard subject. However, Matheesha, you have explained it to us as usual in a very simple manner. So a massive thank you to you, and a lot of merits to you and your family. Once again, a massive thank you to you and your family. Last but not least, lots of merits to everyone who joined the team today, and thank you very much. Hope to see you all. I'm going to stop recording. So anybody, then after that, you can continue the session.